Content presented in Cheshire Corners is for educational and informational purposes only. Please consult a legal professional if you have any questions or concerns about the content of this disclaimer, this series, or the legal implications surrounding psychedelic substances in your jurisdiction.
The best resource that I've come across to learn the brain science of what is known about the psychedelics.
So especially if we're thinking about working with these tools therapeutically.
So I really like the idea of facilitators coming out of a training program and truly understanding what these different experiences can be.
One thing I loved about the One Cheshire Corners podcast that I watched is he said at the very beginning, like, if anything we say here is like inaccurate or anything, like, let us know. We want to keep improving. And I think that's also so great for the peer-led stuff that we do here. Like, we're all like learning and sharing what we're learning, and like correcting anything that anyone says is like super valuable. And in that very podcast, there seemed to be a little bit of like a misconception about how psilocybin and DMT and these serotonergic psychedelics affect serotonin levels themselves. And so I'm going to actually kind of provide a little bit of a correction for that in case that same misconception is here with others. So I don't even remember the name of that podcast, but there was like there was this conversation about how the main like mechanism of action for psilocybin and DMT is its triggering of the 5-HT2A receptors, and then there was some like statement about how that triggering of the 5-HT2A receptors increases the amount of serotonin in the system and in the synapses, and that isn't accurate. So like MDMA and even to some extent like cocaine and meth, they mess with other proteins and vesicles in the synaptic system, and like the VMAT, like which kind of packages and controls the release of serotonin into the presynaptic, postsynaptic, like, you know, the area into our brains. And so like MDMA, for example, does affect the release of serotonin into our mind. And that's why it's also like very dangerous to mix MDMA with like an MAOI or something like that would also inhibit the reuptake of that, or inhibit the metabolism of serotonin in our synapses. But when we talk about psilocybin, or really psilocin, of course, or DMT triggering the 5-HT2A receptors, this is the postsynaptic receptors, and it's really just that those molecules very closely resemble serotonin. You know, like if you look at psilocin or DMT, they're incredibly close to the appearance of serotonin. And so that probably explains why they are agonists of the 5-HT2A receptors. And then when those receptors get hit and interact with these molecules, that isn't exactly what they were designed to interact with. They were designed to interact with serotonin. There's like a whole different signaling pathway of what happens then in your mind, and that's why DMT and psilocybin or psilocin don't affect our brains in the exact same way that serotonin does. There's a different pathway in the receptor that gets triggered. But then there was like kind of a misunderstanding in that podcast that increases the serotonin levels in your system, and it doesn't. The closest thing is that in the system are a bunch of molecules that look a lot like serotonin, but it doesn't change the amount of serotonin in the system. Whereas MDMA does. MDMA messes with many parts of the presynaptic brain cells, including these VMAT terminals, which package and release serotonin and then do release more serotonin into your system. So I think there was a little bit of a misunderstanding there about the difference between how these drugs affect the presynaptic part of our brain cells and the postsynaptic parts of our brain cells. So I don't know if that even makes sense to anybody, if people even care about that stuff. But again, the best resource that I've come across to learn the brain science of what is known about the psychedelics, and we all know that no one knows hardly anything. You know, like maybe we know like 5% of what is happening in our minds with these chemicals, but you know, maybe 50%, I don't know. But I don't think anyone claims we know much more than like 50% of what's going on in there. But the best resource that I've come across to learn what we do know is Ben Malcolm's Spirit Pharmacist. I think it's like anywhere from like $30 to $70 a month for his trainings. And if you go crazy with him, you can get through all of his trainings in like a month or two. So it would just be like more than I learned in $20,000-$30,000 worth of trainings that I've paid for at other places, especially when it comes to like the brain science and neuroscience and, you know, pharmacology of psychedelics. It's just such a great deal. And he has a new program. We don't have any partnership or get any kickbacks or anything, but he has a new program that he's launching right now with a bunch of new content. So I'm going to do that as well. But I did do his 3-part pharmacology like master series, and I think for the bang for the buck, it's hands down the best money I've ever spent in my psychedelic training. So I really highly recommend the Spirit Pharmacist trainings. And even if you just bought his membership for 1 month and then just like tried to really delve into it, it's stuff that doesn't really get taught anywhere else. Like I've really gravitated towards trainings that are less woo and spiritual and more like scientific. And even those, like the Numinous up in Canada, doesn't get anywhere near as detailed as the Ben Malcolm Spirit Pharmacist stuff. So I would recommend that. And then that's also where I learned that, again, this idea of how these chemicals affect presynaptic and postsynaptic, that's where you can really go into detail there and see great graphics and everything about how that all works. So at this next quarterly care thing, so Meg kind of has organized a thing for therapists to just be essentially practicing on each other. And there's been everything from like the more shamanic side of guiding on a mushroom journey to just more middle of the road. And then I'm going to do this Saturdays. It's this Saturday, right? I'm doing this Saturdays, and it's going to be fully like science-based. And Avery actually just sent me a study that just came out like last week, which is really cool, which is talking about the way that our brain works and what they're calling like a top-down processing of information versus a bottom-up processing of information. Did you read that study? Oh yeah, but we initially couldn't even read the full language. There's this great subreddit called r/scholar, where if you can't get the full like language of a research study, you can just post that in there and request it, and someone with access to all the scholarly articles, because they're in a school that has access to them, will just post the full text link to you. So I just posted in there. And it really fits so well with the work we've been doing. A lot of those that go to these different trainings that we do have been doing, where essentially it's just like when we experience anything in the outside world, including like if I'm looking at Jeanette's face right now and they do a brain scan, like only a tiny percentage of what's going on in my brain is like actually tied to the visual cortex and like what I'm actually seeing from her. It's almost all like memories I have of Jeanette and like stories I have about Jeanette and like ideas about women or ideas about people who are too woo or whatever. And And so like that is what they're calling like a top-down relating to sensory input, where our default mode network essentially like deeply filters, alters, and distorts everything that we're perceiving, in the world around us. And how on psychedelics, part of the kind of, most of us have heard that the default mode network does get kind of diminished when we use these psychedelics, and other parts of our brain that are often less used light up, and that's why we end up with these like connections that seem pretty profound to us, because they're hitting so many different parts of our psyche and influencing so many different parts of our psyche. But this study was what? Yeah, waking them up. Yeah, totally. So this recent study was talking about how it really opens up the ability to experience people, ideas, concepts, and visual stimuli, auditory stimuli, any experience of the world around you from a bottom-up view, in the way that like a 3 or 4-year-old would, where like a 3 or 4-year-old like sees the clouds and isn't like thinking about the thousands of other times he's seen clouds from other perspectives, and from when he flew on a plane or flew in a paper or a hot air balloon or whatever. He's just like really grokking them kind of like freshly and anew. And so this study was about how psilocybin in particular, and LSD to some extent, like as they're showing brain scans, like have the brain experience these things in ways that are a little bit more like children do, where you're like freshly experiencing clouds, not from all these memory centers and all these stories and default mode network filters of clouds, but from like a more fresh perspective, where it is really centered in your visual cortex, or in like the parts of your mind that's processing like what you're seeing or hearing. So I'm excited about that, and merging it with some work that I've been doing anyway that is mostly based in like Gestalt and some somatic experiencing, which is practices in relating to each other and relating to concepts and ideas in ways that essentially kind of quiet our brain and ground us in physical sensations and sensory inputs. And I'll have to put down this mic, but I'm tempted, since we have a little bit of time, to just like have us do like a little like paired exercise or something. Are you guys down for that? I mean, maybe that's a little silly to do, but all right, we'll do like a little like paired exercise. And I actually did this for the first time in this way at Burning Man just 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is an exercise that I've been leading people through for well over a decade, in different retreats and workshops that I do, but I was just like inspired to try it in a new way. And then reading this study about this like bottom up, this ability of psychedelics to let us process stimuli in a new way, really kind of piggybacked with this. And so I'm thinking about maybe bringing it in as part of the like set and setting of the ceremonies that we're going to do this coming weekend. First, the little brain science stuff. Well, I will show people like, here's exactly what happens. Here's your brain, here's your blood levels of psilocin, and here's how quickly your body is converting psilocybin into psilocin. Here's where you kind of peak in your blood levels, and like what kinds of experiences seem to mirror the blood level peaking, and then like what's actually tends to happen with people as the blood levels are going down. So we'll do a little bit of the neuroscience, then we're going to shift into this top-down, bottom-up kind of like dichotomy or whatever, and then do a couple exercises that might get people into a, set and setting. Set is essentially stands for like mindset, and then setting is more about like your physical environment. And so more focused on the set than the mindset of us quieting our brain and experiencing other people or our surroundings in a way that is more directly tied to sensations or senses as opposed to thoughts. Does that make sense? All right, so let's do a quick exercise. I'll just hold this even though. All right, so pair up with someone and try and like face them. So like you guys could face each other. You guys could face each other. Yeah. Okay, so thank you guys for doing this. This isn't something we've usually done anything like this in these meetups, because we usually don't have time, but since today we have fewer presenters than normal, we've got a little extra time. So if you're willing, you don't have to do anything I'm asking you to do, but if you feel up for it, close your eyes and raise your dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, raise your right hand. And then with your eyes closed, gesture with that right hand towards any sensation you're noticing in your body. It could be just your butt on the cushion. It could be the air coming in through your nose and mouth. It could be anything. So just pay attention to that sensation. And then if that sensation moves and you're like, oh, I'm now feeling more in my throat or my back is sore because of the way I'm sitting, just move that dominant hand to wherever you're noticing anything now. So it doesn't have to change, but if something else is becoming the dominant sensation, predominant sensation in your body, switch to that area. Good. And then try to slowly open your eyes, but keep the flashlight of your attention focused on your body. So you're here looking at somebody else as your eyes slowly open, but you're still mostly paying attention to yourself. And for a lot of you, this is no big deal, but for a lot of people, it's really difficult for them to be engaged with another human and yet really centered in their own sensory or somatic experience. So you're noticing this person across from you, but you're paying attention to your own body. And then we're gonna just do one quick exchange. So we're gonna say, back and forth with your partner, you're gonna say, I'm seeing, and you just say whatever you're seeing, but it needs to be dumb, not like a thought, like your joy or your energy or anything, just mostly we're probably gonna be looking at each other's eyes. So you just say I'm seeing your eyes and I'm thinking, and then whatever the fuck you're thinking, there's no rules about that. And then the other partner goes back and does the same. Just do that for a couple minutes.
The reason we started Cheshire Corners, yes, YouTube channel, because we wanted to learn about psychedelics and we have no clue what it is. Company who's doing ketamine assisted therapy, I thought that ketamine is laughing gas. And thinking that psychedelics psilocybin is going through the serotonin receptacles and it's a serotonin, it would be the smallest mistake probably we make. We're making a lot of mistakes. But, when we're looking at the rest of the world, it's probably forgivable because the rest of the world also makes a lot of mistakes. We just wanted to spark the debate and hear all kinds of opinions, why it's good and why it's not so good, and also look at why we think psychedelics, in my mind, psychedelics are so important because they not just helping the mental health issues, they're not just something that giving us an opportunity to rise a little bit higher compared to what we were before and seeing the world from different space, but also we start thinking about mind, brain, soul, consciousness, just because we're thinking about psychedelics.
Yeah, so I just want to put a plug in really for all of us, though, that have any kind of training in the space of supporting people in the psychedelic space. And the book is called Decolonizing Therapy. So especially if we're thinking about working with these tools therapeutically, it just is really good social context for all of the things that can be present that are not necessarily the individual experience. So I just invite that as a really great read. So decolonizing, yeah. So an example is a tight tie between grief and rage. That's ancestral grief and rage that we see in oppressed communities, particularly BIPOC communities, where there's generations and generations of not being able to break through systemic oppression, and how that shows up as grief, and then how that grief, because it is not allowed socially, shows up as shame, or is shamed, and then that shame transfers into rage, and then we continue that as an oppressive cycle by predominantly in the media showing our BIPOC populations being full of rage and being the example of the angry black man or whatever that is. And so the idea, and it's helpful certainly working with BIPOC communities and other underrepresented groups, LGBTQ, like all of that. However, for any of us, there's some element of that ancestral social programming that's present with us through our family systems. So it's kind of that social location of moving from the individual to the family to the broader community context to the national, global, and like where somebody sees themselves within that social location, and really pushing us as guides and therapists to expand our view of the rules and the systems and how they create safety and how they create oppression at the same time. So that's the plug for decolonizing therapy. There's also like an Instagram channel and I think like a website too from the author. It's really good stuff. Decolonizing Therapy.
By Jennifer Mullen.
Yep, by Jennifer Mullen. So that was one plug, and then the second plug is I am facilitating with another clinician, a men's circle, October 24th. So two women guides for a group of men, and our focus is grief and love. So we're excited to hop into that. If anybody's curious about it, let me know.
Okay, so just a little plug about the ketamine-assisted therapy training program. They're about to kick off next week in partnership with Ballin Medical and Wellness. Beth Ballin was one of the first ketamine clinics here in Colorado and is now one of the leading clinics. And we're really excited to be partnered with her for this training program. What I'm most excited about is that the training programs that we run really take this like peer-led model philosophy into the training program. So when we get a group of people together that are all really excited to learn this particular thing, they're also coming in with a wealth of knowledge that everybody else in the group is probably also really interested in. So the way that we structure the program is leaving a lot of space for peers to come in and teach whatever they're most excited about in that moment. So not necessarily directly related to ketamine, but definitely related to the psychedelic assisted therapy space. So I love that part of the training model that we do. And what's happening in the program is that we're going to do there's the high dose track and the low dose track, and then a combination of the two. And it's very experiential. So really passionate about when we're learning about ketamine, having people go through these training programs and get the experiences with ketamine in all of the different routes of administration, because it's just a different drug depending on how it is being administered. So I really like the idea of facilitators coming out of a training program and truly understanding what these different experiences can be, and maybe how they can be paired together. So doing things like high dose ketamine experiences and then having an integration process with the low dose psychoanalytic work afterwards. So the structure of the program will be the high dose stuff at the beginning, experientials that include intramuscular and IV, and then we go into kind of like the bulk of the training part, because this is where we get into like really bringing in therapy modalities, where we will be using low doses of ketamine with nasal or troche, buccal route of administration, and that's where we get to play around with some really interesting somatic different therapy modalities to work with low doses. And I have found this to be like the most interesting healing space, because it allows you to work in a space where you can truly start to drop the story and ask, what is the body trying to tell you? And I think that like that is where the real healing happens. So when we go into this like low dose part of the training, it's also really experiential. So there's a lot of learning about how do we work in this space when we have like this 90-minute low dose session with someone who's on this low dose ketamine. And in order to do that, we drop into experiencing it as an observer. So you will observe somebody receiving the treatment. You will then be a patient. You will be receiving the treatment with someone else observing. And then you'll have the opportunity to be the facilitator and receive feedback on how you're doing. So again, really experiential. So by the time you're out of the program, I think that there'll just be a lot of confidence in terms of walking into working with your clients with this medicine. And the other thing that I love about this program is that it all of the graduates will have a year-long membership with Ballin Medical, which will provide 50% off prescriptions and relationship with Beth Ballin and the clinic for a year, including supervision hours. And so it means that when you start wanting to work with your clients and using ketamine, you've now got a partner in Beth to make sure that you're getting the prescriptions that you need for your clients. You're having supervision along the way to make sure that you are continuing to get feedback on how you're working with them. And you've got access to kind of like everything that you need to be able to actually provide ketamine in a safe and ethical way. So that's our ketamine program. I'm very excited for anyone that wants to join. We still have a few spots left.
All right, it's great meeting you guys.